Who doesn't love a good rivalry, especially in business? Both companies are trying to outcompete each other, and in the end, the winner is us, the consumer. In this video, we're going to look into one of the biggest automotive rivalries in history, Ford versus Chevy.
For the 718th time, we present Camaro versus Mustang.
Many of us rely on them to get around, and I always wonder, you probably do too, which one is better?
It's just one offensive in its battle with rival Pepsi for hearts and taste buds.
Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to support the video. Henry Ford's vision and mechanical genius produced the most famous automobile in history, the Model T. William Durant set out to challenge the most popular car in America and had a vision of his own. In 1911, having been fired by General Motors, Will Durant started to manufacture his own car, a low-priced and immediately popular car, which was named after his business partner and famous racing driver, Louis Chevrolet. The profits from this venture enabled Durant to purchase enough stock in his old employer, General Motors, to allow him to return and take over the management of GM. In 1917, Durant brought his Chevrolet company into GM and prepared to go after the market that belonged to the Model T. This was a bold undertaking at the time, since Ford sold 5 to 6 times as many cars as his nearest competitor. But this started one of the biggest rivalries in the automotive industry. Chevrolet and others ate into the Model T's market share throughout the 1920s. In 1927, Ford saw their market share slipping, so they went back to the drawing board. A year later, in 1928, the new Ford Model A took the market by storm. It had a blistering 40 horsepower compared with the Model T's 20 horsepower, and it came in 4 colors, but obviously not black. It was styled by Edison Ford, Henry's son, and his artistic flair produced a beautiful car. As Ford celebrated producing a winner, Chevy was working on a project of their own. In 1929, Chevy's famous 6-cylinder OHV engine hit the market, and with 50 horsepower, 10 more than the Model A. This was the start of Chevy's claim of more car for the same money. The Great Depression began, but Ford sold 4.5 million thrifty Model A's before production ceased in 1931. While other businesses disintegrated and failed, Ford was still selling a lot of cars. Ford outsold Chevy in 1929 and 1930. Although Chevy was back on top from 1931 through 1933. The 1933 Chevrolet 6 was priced at $555 to around $675, which is around $9,000 today, while a Ford Model A costs anywhere from $385 to $550, which is around $6,000 today. The larger and more powerful Chevy found favor among customers, but Henry Ford had one more trick up his sleeve. He would find a way to produce a low-priced Ford with a V8 engine. Henry's plan depended on finding an inexpensive way to produce this V8 engine, a complicated and pricey engine for the time. His team found a way to cast engine blocks in one piece. That was the trick that made it possible to produce the famous Ford Flathead V8. When it debuted in 1932, it made Ford the unchallenged horsepower leader, and sales figures responded. Ford topped Chevy in sales from 1934 to 1937. However, from 1938 to 1942, when car production stopped due to World War II, Ford started to fall behind Chevy in sales figures. Henry Ford had a series of strokes in the 1930s, but he still ran the company, although his son Edison was officially the titled manager. As Henry Ford started to age, he started to make some questionable decisions for a growing company, such as not having an accounting department. The company started to have serious financial issues, and in 1943 disaster struck. Edison Ford died of cancer, and Henry again took over total management of the company. Edison was an excellent manager, and he managed to mitigate many of Henry's questionable decisions. Wartime production kept Ford going, but they were now in real danger of going bankrupt. Chevrolet, on the other hand, had weathered the Great Depression by adding innovative new features. It started using hydraulic brakes and column gear shifts, and in 1939 a station wagon was added to the lineup. In 1940, a power-top convertible became available with all Chevy's low-price models. Both Ford and Chevy under GM contributed greatly to the war effort. Edelson Ford designed a new plant at Willow Run to build the B-24 four-engine bomber. By 1944, it was producing an amazing 1 plane per hour on its Ford-style assembly line. GM also built planes, plus other military vehicles, and was the largest single producer of any wartime hardware. The U.S. military might have won the war, but U.S. manufacturing provided the tools, with Ford and Chevy both leading the way. The U.S. government knew that Ford, its big defense contractor, was in trouble. Towards the end of the war, Henry Ford II, which was Edelson's son, was discharged from the Navy so he could take over the ailing company. Ford teetered on the edge of bankruptcy, and something had to be done fast. This task fell on Henry Ford II, since the elder Henry was too ill to function and passed away in 1947. The war wouldn't last forever, and Ford had to figure out something to win their customers back. After World War II, the automaker changed dramatically. Ford and Chevy launched massive advertising campaigns, and by the mid-1950s, yearly styling upgrades became part of their car wars. The Ford division replaced its vulnerable flathead V8 with a new OHV V8, and they also began offering a 6-cylinder engine. In 1955, Chevy added a small block V8, which has to become its most successful engine ever. Its derivative, the LS V8, was used in American GM cars until 2004, and is still produced in Mexico a half-century later. In the 1950s, Ford decided to produce a futuristic, upscale car, and spent $400 million to make sure they got it right. The result was the Edelson, and they couldn't have gotten it more wrong. After luring away dealerships of other makers to become Edelson dealers, and trying everything to sell it, they finally abandoned the venture in 1960. Ford, however, was still so flush with cash from the post-war success that it continually paid dividends throughout the Edelson area. During the 1950s, Ford was top in sales only twice. The rest of the decade belonged to Chevy. The 1960s was the start of the pony car wars. Ford saw a need to develop a car for the younger market, since the baby boomers were coming of age and ready to buy cars. The main goal of the new car was that it had to be low-priced and therefore cheap to make. Ford assistant manager Lee Iacocca was responsible for the Mustang development, but the origin of its unique styling is still disputed. The starting point was the Falcon's foundation, which was modified extensively for the new car. Parts were also used from Galaxies, Fairlines, and Fords of all sizes. Nothing was off limits. The Falcon's body proportions were tweaked until a sleek and unique vehicle resulted that in 1964 would take the market by storm. The Mustang. Chevy was caught flat-footed by Ford's new sensation, and had nothing that could compete with the Mustang until 1967, when its Camaro was introduced. The Camaro sold well, but the popular Mustang outsold it to become Ford's third most successful model ever. From the roaring 20s until the late 1960s, selling 1 million cars per year for either Ford or Chevy was considered a good sales year. However, as the economy grew, sales went up. Over 2 million units per year were now needed to win the numbers race. Despite the popularity of the Mustang, the 1960s yearly sales numbers races went overwhelmingly to Chevy. Chevy and the Ford full-size cars, the Impala and LTD, lost sales after gas prices shot up in the 1970s. It also seems that both companies became more focused on short-term profits than on quality. Ford introduced many smaller cars to the lineup, including the Pinto, which was touted to be the next Model T. It sold very well until it was discovered that a rear-end collision could cause the gas tank to explode. Next, Ford was found to be lobbying against a federal law aimed at toughening up fuel tank protection. Buyers abandoned Ford in droves, and the popular little car was doomed. Chevy also expanded into the smaller cars with the Vega. The Chevy division was ordered to produce and market the Vega, and they weren't happy about it. Quality control was lax, and labor problems also plagued the production. The Vega looked stylish, but it had a combination of old features, such as rear-wheel drive, and disastrous innovations, such as weak aluminum block engines. There were many body rust outs reported after only 2 years of use. After strong early sales, the Vega became so despised that resale value almost was nothing. For many smartening Vega owners, their next car was their first Japanese car. Through the 1970s and 1980s, Chevy constantly outsold Ford, but by the 1990s, sales for both were about half of their early 1970s figures, as Japanese cars reigned the market. In 2009, after the recession had taken its toll, GM accepted a government bailout loan to keep itself afloat. In 2010, they announced that they had paid it back. GM accepted the government bailout money so that it could finance new models to basically reinvent itself. Ford rejected the offer of a government loan, but in doing so, it ended up with less cash for R&D and restructuring. On the plus side, Ford's go-it-alone policy did gain it a lot of goodwill as it reflected the company's strong sales since then. Ford and Chevy are part of American history and the automotive industry. America's best-selling full-size cars in history is the Chevy Impala. America's best-selling vehicle for 28 consecutive years, up to 2010, was the Ford F-150. The rivalry is still definitely strong to this day, but new competition from automakers like Tesla are pushing both Ford and Chevy to new ground. Ford recently introduced the Mustang Mach E, which is a fully electric Mustang, which is a direct reaction to Tesla vehicles. Ford is also planning on introducing self-driving to the Mach E as a competitor to Tesla's Autopilot. Chevy also has introduced the Volt and the Bolt, which are both electric vehicles. I hope Ford and Chevy can keep up with the competition, as people love these two brands as they are part of American history. And with that being said, as always, thanks for watching, and like and subscribe to see more videos.